who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the program. This is the inaugural episode of the In the Lab Room podcast. I must admit, this feels right. Okay? Me in front of a mic talking football. This just feels right. Like hand in glove. This feels great. And I'm glad to be here talking to you about the sport that we all love, the National Football League. Jam-packed show as we get this thing kicked off. I want to go ahead and set the table for you so you know what's on the horizon for this episode. And on the docket, we will talk AFC East football later on in the program. Also have a special guest for you. I'm not a fantasy football guy, but I know many of my viewers, listeners, all of you who support my channel, this podcast, any of my endeavors, a lot of you are fantasy football owners, players, you're in leagues. It matters to you. And because it doesn't matter to me, I still have a responsibility, however, to make sure that I appeal to the masses. You care about fantasy football, so in turn, I care about fantasy football. We will talk fantasy a little bit later on. I'll have a special guest on to help me with that subject matter, so stick around for that. But before we can get to any of those things, let me do something that you'll begin to learn and get used to at the top of just about every podcast. Me dropping a gem on your melon. Let me drop this gem on your melon. Okay, gotta open up your mind right now. Open your mind, let your conscience be free. You're now rolling with your man, Louie T-double-E. Okay? So let me impart a little knowledge on your brain. Okay? And the topic of choice today is how the rich stay rich. And what you'll find a lot of times with these gems I drop on your melon, a lot of times these gems will also have life implications to them as well. Life undertones, if you will. These double as life lessons a lot of times. How the rich stay rich. In the NFL, teams do things that a lot of times we don't understand when they initially happen. But a lot of times what you'll find with the really good teams, the teams that win Super Bowls, the teams that are perennial playoff participants, I call them triple Ps. Gotta learn the lingo here, folks. Won't be saying that out for you every time. I'll just say triple P. Perennial playoff participant. That's what a triple P is. They do things that separate them from the rest of the teams in the league. And this, for me, goes back to the Giants of the mid-2000s. And we make jokes, especially I do. I can't speak for anyone else. But I make fun of the fact that the Giants often draft defensive linemen. It's what they do. Or at least it's what they had done in the past. This was something that you could all but be assured of come draft time. Giants going to take another defensive lineman. At face value, you look at it and say, oh, the Giants are just taking another defensive lineman. What's new? But at its core, what the Giants were actually doing was making sure that their advantage stayed an advantage. In essence, they were making sure that they stayed rich at a position that they were already rich at. It's a concept that broke teams around the league can't understand. They can't fathom why you would take a player at a position where you already have an abundance of resources at and add them to a group of players that you already have that are highly productive. Same premise in life. Broke people can't understand why people with money do some of the things that they do. But there's a rhyme and a reason to everything. Those Giants teams knew in order to win, pressure was the key to victory. That's how they beat the Patriots in 2007. That's how they beat the Patriots in 2011. You fast forward now and you look at the Carolina Panthers. Same thing. Now, I actually said this to myself when they drafted Coney Ealy, defensive end out of Missouri. I asked myself, what are they doing? They just drafted Star Lotulelei, defensive tackle out of Utah. They already had Greg Hardy, the Kraken, on one side, and he hadn't gotten into his legal issues. That wouldn't happen for another 5 or 6 days after the draft. So they had no idea Hardy was about to incur all of this off the field stuff that would land him out of Carolina. Had no idea that was coming. Charles Johnson was a monster for him, double-digit sack getter. They had just given him a big contract. And I said, what are they doing? They don't need Coney Ealy. But they knew in order for them to be the team defensively that they wanted to be, they need to get pressure on the quarterback. Now you look at this team. Greg Hardy's moved on. Coney Ealy looks like a viable threat as a pass rusher in this preseason. Looks like they did the right thing, stockpiling talent at a position where they already had talent. But let's talk about some other teams. What about the Indianapolis Colts? I think a lot of people made a lot of their first round selection, taking Philip Dorsett, the wide receiver out of Miami. Didn't make a lot of sense. And I know I was one of those people saying, I don't like the pick. This team could use some beef up front on the offensive side of the football. Andrew Luck seems to be running for his life every single year. They could use some beef on the defensive side of the football. They got ran on last season. Take some beef. It's what's for dinner. They elected to go skill position. And you look at their wide receiver position and you say to yourself, is this necessary? I mean, you went out in the offseason and got the one and only DRE, Andre Johnson. You already had T.Y. Hilton, who had exploded the season before, and you could see it coming. He's turning into a bona fide star in the league. You still have Dante Moncrief, who had a very good rookie season, and I think is the prototypical number one wide receiver. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got everything you're looking for. He just needs seasoning. Well, he's going to continue to get better. Griff Whalen, I haven't even touched the tight ends. Why do you feel the need to draft Philip Dorsett in the first round? It's because the Colts understand offense is going to be the key to them staying atop the AFC South. Now, you can laugh all you want about the shortcomings of that division, but the Houston Texans just, 3 years ago ran that division. So it's not that long ago. We're not that far removed from another team calling that their division. Colts know that if they want to continue to win in that division, Andrew Luck, which is their best player and arguably one of the best players in the entire National Football League, needs to be surrounded by talent at all times. What do you think? Andre Johnson's going to play another 5 years? Nope. Griff Whalen is nice. He's not great. T.Y. Hilton is awesome. Dante Moncrief has the potential to be a number one wide receiver in this league. But again, you don't want to make assumptions. Just get the best player available and stay rich at a position that you're already rich at. Every year, the Colts go to the playoffs and they run into a juggernaut called the New England Patriots. You get one more receiver that they can't check and maybe you got a shot. You could argue they could use that help on the defensive side of the football, but you can't fault a team for making sure they stay rich at a position that they're already rich at. Lastly, let's go out to Green Bay. Because I know for a fact that I looked at the Packers with one of those sideways smirks when they took Ty Montgomery in the third round of this past spring's draft. And I said, Mike, what are you guys doing? Seriously, what are you guys doing? You've got Air Jordy out there tearing up the league in Jordy Nelson. You've got Randall Cobb, who just signed a new extension. You've got Devontae Adams, who had a coming out party versus the Cowboys in the playoffs last year. You've still got Jeff Janis and Jared Abadaris on ice from a draft the season prior. What are we doing? What are we doing, guys? You need another receiver? Really? Now look at where the Packers are. And again, much like the Indianapolis Colts, when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, you can never, and I mean never, have too many weapons. But just look at where the Packers are now. Air Jordy, gone for the season. Torn ACL. Randall Cobb, bruised shoulder, going to be out probably the first 2 weeks or so of the season. He's pushing to be ready for week 1. Who's to say? Either way, he's not going to be 100% come week 1 of the season. You're down your top 2 targets from a season ago, and you're not even into the season 1 week yet. That's what staying ahead of the game can do for you. That's why the rich stay rich. They draft for the future, not the present. That's what broke teams do. Broke teams reach for needs. The rich stay rich by drafting the best player available. So go ahead, share a laugh at the expense of the Carolina Panthers for selecting yet another first-round linebacker in Shaq Thompson, and even doubling down on that same position later on in the draft by selecting linebacker David Mayo, when they already boast one of the most explosive and dynamic linebacking cores in all of the National Football League. On the surface, it makes little to no sense. But trust and believe, Panthers general manager Dave Gettleman knows exactly where his football team's bread is buttered. So when you see the Green Bay Packers taking another wide receiver, or you see the Seattle Seahawks taking another long corner or pass rusher, when you see the Carolina Panthers selecting yet another linebacker, just know that's how the NFL's rich stay rich. I'll take a quick break for some shameless promotion, and then we'll come back and flip it over to the B-side. You're listening to the In the Lab Room podcast, a function of the Louie T Network. Life is all about decisions. Decisions are filled with if-then statements. So let me help you make some great decisions. If you are listening to this podcast, then you are probably an NFL fan. If you're an NFL fan, then you'd probably like my YouTube channel. Check out the Louie T Network on YouTube. Louie space Tee. And subscribe while you're there. All 32 teams, something for everyone. You'll enjoy the channel. If you like my YouTube channel, then you should check out my website, louietnetwork.com, which is where you can find this pod and other NFL-related items. And while you're at it, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at In the Lab Room, like this podcast, and like the Facebook page In the Lab Room. Again, like this podcast, which you should also download on iTunes. That was staple button easy. Now, if only life's decisions were that easy. Welcome back to the program. Guys, I can get used to this. I swear. I was once told by a wise man, don't work harder, work smarter. This is pretty easy right here. This is easy money. I don't know if I envisioned it being this fun and this easy, but I don't know. Maybe I need to stop doing videos and just do this. Nah, I'm kidding. But seriously, this is nice. I can get used to this. Now, I talked about the B-side and jumping into that on the other side of the break. And what the B-side essentially is, for those of you who didn't have an experience with the tape deck or the record player, artists used to put out singles. You know, one song that you might have heard on the radio that you really liked, and instead of you going out and buying an entire LP, you would go out and you would buy a single. And that would be the A side, the thing that you actually paid for, what you wanted to hear. That was on the A side. You flip that over though. You flip that tape over, you flip that record over, and they give you some bonus material. Maybe it's just the instrumental of the song that you got on the A side. Maybe it's a track you've never heard before. Or maybe it's a song that they'll come out with and release later on down the line and they just want to tease it and see how it's received. Either way, that was the B-side. Bonus material. What I want to do with my B-side is take a story that's out there for public consumption and look at it from a different angle. I want to flip that story over. Everybody's talking about it from one angle. I want to flip it over and talk about it from another one. The angle no one else is really talking about. That's what I want to tackle. So you look at the NFL cutting down the rosters from 90 players to 75. Right before the 4th preseason game. Can anybody tell me why that makes sense? And you know, the A side of this is, oh, let's talk about the notable cuts. Let's talk about Trent Richardson and his last stay in the National Football League as he was cut by the Oakland Raiders. Probably one of the biggest draft busts in recent memory. 3rd overall selection in the 2012 draft. Cut by the Raiders. Probably not going to get another chance in the league. Let's talk about Phil Taylor. 2011 first round pick. Uber talented defensive tackle. Can't stay healthy. Chronic knee issues. That's the A side of this. But let's flip this over to the B side. Why are we releasing players prior to the 4th preseason game? Why do we feel the need to trim these rosters down from 90 to 75 now? This is the one game you would think where you would need more reserve players. These guys have been at it for the last 2 months strong in these camps, learning these playbooks, trying to better themselves. Hell, some of these players have been around since the OTAs, trying to earn a roster spot, if not with that team, with another franchise. And now, before the one game that they'll actually get to play 4 quarters, you take them and you tell them they've got to find work elsewhere. Does that not seem backwards to you? It does to me. I mean, this would be the perfect time for you to allow that 90-man roster to be put to use. We know just about the entire league treats this last preseason game as a throwaway. For the guys trying to make the roster, for guys trying to put tape on for other teams to have a look at, this is their season essentially. Right here. And for the NFL to say, you know what? I need you to cut 15 guys right now. And I need you to take 22 guys, essentially is what you're doing, because you got a 53-man roster that you're going to have when the season starts. I need you to take 22 guys and ask them to play the entire game. Hopefully nobody gets hurt, because if you do, then you got to tap into some stuff that you don't want to put on the field. I mean, take, for instance, the Washington Redskins situation. Now, we know a lot of what has happened in the nation's capital is of their own doing. That's not disputable. But what is a little off-putting is the fact that Robert Griffin III hasn't been medically cleared yet from his quote unquote, and I've got air quotes up. You can't see them, but I'm telling you, I've got air quotes up, concussion. And so he's not able to play on Thursday versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ironically, Kirk Cousins is now your new anointed starter. He's not playing on Thursday either. So that leaves you with just Colt McCoy to start and finish that game. What happens if Colt McCoy gets injured? You gotta put Kirk Cousins in the game, your starter, a guy that you don't want to see the field until week 1 versus the Miami Dolphins. But because you had to trim your roster down from 90 to 75, you don't have another quarterback on the roster. Now you say to yourself, well, why don't the Redskins just go out and sign a quarterback? If you're trying to evaluate all the other players on the team, you need a guy that actually knows the playbook. You can't just go get some Joe Schmo off the street, bring him in 2 days prior to the last preseason game and say, hey, need you to run the offense. Impossible. Okay? So to think that you could just go out and grab a quarterback, throw him on your team and say, hey, go out and run the offense. It's not fair to the other guys that have been on the team playing and trying to make an NFL roster for the last 3 to 4 months. It's not fair to them to just have a guy come in, not know the playbook, and have to evaluate other players based off of that guy's performance. So I just think the NFL has it all wrong. It's one thing, and I get it. The owners don't have to pay those players anymore after they cut them. And you also have a dynamic where you're not going from 90 down to 53 all at once, but you're cutting it down at a time. So you're cutting 15 down, then you cut 22 down instead of cutting 37 all at once. I get that premise as well. However, and also what you do by doing it this way is you give other teams a chance to pick up some guys like a Trent Richardson. If someone were interested in him, they'd have a chance to pick him up, bring him into the roster, have him get acclimated to the playbook a little sooner than if you waited till after the 4th preseason game. With that being said, however, I still think it's a farce that in the last preseason game, these guys worked hard to get to this point, to have an opportunity to put some footage on tape, and you cut them right before the game that they'll actually get to play in. Makes no sense to me. But I digress. Fantasy football is real, people. I mean, I'm not trying to convince you of that. I'm convincing myself. I'm not a fantasy football guy, and probably never will be. I am fascinated, however, with those of you who do play and the stories that you tell about your teams and, you know, needing to do this and how this player got you this many points and how this guy didn't get you anything and how you ended up losing your league in the final week because of this and that. I get a kick out of all of that stuff. But as far as fantasy football is concerned and me being a part of it, won't happen. But that being said, I do understand the importance of fantasy football. This is a phenomenon that isn't going away. Okay? This is something that is real. It's tangible. People love it. This is a part of football now. Whether I like it or not, whether some old curmudgeon likes it or not, this is a real entity that is sweeping the nation. So, with that being said, I thought it would only be fitting that in my first episode of the In the Lab Room podcast, I talk fantasy football. Who would have thought? Me talking fantasy football, or me having someone else talk about fantasy football on the program. So, what I decided to do was sit down and talk to a guy that I feel like has as much knowledge about fantasy football and the inner workings of it and how to win your fantasy football league. So without any further ado, Let's talk fantasy football, shall we?
Now, I told you guys I had a special treat for you later on in the podcast. I'm not oblivious to the fact that fantasy football is real and it is played by millions and millions of people, including a lot of my listeners. A lot of people on YouTube ask me all the time about fantasy leagues. I don't play fantasy, but just because I don't play doesn't mean that it's not important and you guys don't care about it. So I was able to secure a special guest that I feel really good about. Okay. For some of you who are ESPNers, you're with Matthew Berry. For those of you who follow the NFL Network, you're with Michael Fabiano. This is a guy. You could put all those guys in one fantasy league, and the guy that I'm taking is my man, Brandon Arrington. He is somewhat of a fantasy football savant. He plays in so many different leagues. It's ridiculous how many leagues this guy plays in at a time. He plays in so many leagues that I don't even know how he keeps up with all of the different players that he has and the different point systems and all of that stuff. I don't know anything about, but I am very fascinated with how fantasy football works, and all of the fantasy football information that I get it from this guy. I come to him because he is a guru when we're talking fantasy football. And let me be the first to introduce a guy that I think can help you change the game in your fantasy football league, Mr. Brandon Arrington. Welcome to the program, and thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you for having me, Louie. I appreciate the high accolades that you've given me.
No doubt about it. You deserve it, my man. Now, again, this is me, and I don't play fantasy football, so I don't want to make any assumptions. I'm assuming, though, however, most of you have already had your drafts. If I'm in a fantasy football league, if I'm an owner of a team, if I'm an owner of a league, I'm not having my fantasy draft until after week 3 of the preseason. I think it's only right. It's only fair to all of the participants in the league, because if a player goes down in week 2 of the preseason, week 3 of the preseason, you're screwed. So from that perspective, I would want to wait until after week 3 of the preseason. With that being said, most of you have already had your drafts, but I still want to talk about some different dynamics about players and how you should take them, who you should be considering. But the first thing, though, before we even get into that, for some of those people out there who aren't fantasy players like myself, or for those who are, I think this is a question that needs to be answered. Okay, when Brandon is entering a fantasy football league, what is your philosophy?
Oh, man, very good question. For me, it's plain and simple. First and foremost, you got to know the rules of the game if you plan on winning. So point distribution, you have to study to figure out what counts, what's going to lead you to victory in your league. You're in a 2-quarterback league. How are the quarterbacks graded? How are they scored? Does it favor wide receivers? Sometimes, in PPR leagues, you better try to get your hands on backs that catch the football. Guys like Alfred Morris, they're not going to add the same amount of value that you're going to get out of a guy like Jamal Charles. So you need to know how the points are going to be distributed. Plain and simple. You got to know the rules of the game if you ever plan on winning.
And that's one that goes back to one of my favorite quotes. And you got to know the rules to the game in order to play. Okay. You know the rules to the game, play. And for those of us out there that are dummies of fantasy football, okay, we're reading the dummies for, Fantasy Football for Dummies guide. What's PPR?
PPR, points per reception. PPR is, and like I said, there's so many different formats out there that your league and how the points may be distributed could be totally different than leagues that I'm in. But points per reception, in some leagues you get as much as a point, an entire point for a guy that's catching the ball. So you get a guy like Jarvis Landry, who you and I both know doesn't go too far away from the line of scrimmage. He can actually be a good play for you just based off the simple fact that he catches a lot of balls. Caught 84 balls as a rookie last year. You have to expect that production to go up year 2 with Ryan Tannehill. So, guys like him, they do have value. And while they're not going to be someone you're looking to pick in the first couple of rounds, if he's around in the late half of the 4th, maybe even the 5th round, he's a guy you have to take a look at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is something that I kind of spoke to earlier about, the draft, and a lot of people probably already have made their picks in their fantasy drafts. For those who haven't, however, what are some draftable positions in the first 2 rounds? Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of a scenario, right? Okay, 12-player league. You're drafting 5th in the first round, and in the second round, you're drafting 7th. What would be the first 2 players you would target at those positions in your fantasy league?
Well, first and foremost, I'm going to tell you right now, if I'm drafting 5th in any league, that's a juicy spot. I'm guaranteeing victory from the jump. That's a very good spot because you're going to have some very attractive options available to you in the first round. But this is somewhat of a philosophy-based question because to me, you have to look at your big board. I have a big board. I'm not looking to go off of anybody else's rankings. I'm going to tell you right now that this year, there's not a lot of elite running backs out there. So if you don't get one early, you're rolling the dice. I would say typically in most formats, backs are going to win you fantasy football tournaments. That's where you're going to get your W. So you better load up on backs. I would say in the first round, I'm probably going to go for the best running back available, especially at the sweet spot. At the number 5 spot, I'm not considering anything else but a running back. And then when I come back around in the second round, I'm probably looking to pick up the best receiver who I have on the board. Now, there's guys out there who I'm really not as excited about as some other quote-unquote experts, but, a guy like Calvin Johnson, who I feel like this year is being overlooked. I know he was banged up a lot last year, but he's a guy who could easily be around for you in the second round, and I would absolutely love that. I will take that all day, every day. Guy like Odell Beckham Jr., I'm going to let you know right now, I'm a little scared. He scares me this week. I've been underwhelmed by his performance throughout the preseason, and I don't know that he's going to be able to replicate the success that he had last year. So a guy like him, I would tell you I'm not going to tell you not to draft him. I'm just going to say buyer beware. But yes, in the second round, I'm going for the best receiver on the board. And unless you throw a gem, like obviously there's times when you recognize that, your 11 buddies that you thought were pretty well versed in football, and you find out that there's a guy or two who knows absolutely nothing. So if there is an elite running back out there that has no business being around in the second round, man, don't hesitate and pull the trigger on that guy. But
so you would take 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds?
If I'm playing with guys who are asleep behind the wheel, I'm taking the best player available. The receiver position is so deep that if you can get 2 of the best running backs that are in the league, if you get 2 guys each with like a top 10, top 15 backs, I take that in a heartbeat. It is not my strategy. I'll tell you, in the majority of leagues that I've been in and I've drafted thus far, that has not been my approach. But it's not something that I'm afraid of either.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a heck of a lot of sense. All right. So this is the next thing that I want to get to. Okay. Give me if you're a fantasy football owner, right? Give me a list of elite prospects at each position. So we're talking skill positions here. We're talking tight end, receiver, running back, quarterback. If I'm a fantasy football owner looking to stockpile my team with elite prospects, give me the creme de la creme at each position in your estimation.
While I can give you like a top 3, top 5, I'm going to give it to you as I see it. I'm not going to tell you a guy's elite when, truth be told, I don't see him elite. We're going to start at the quarterback position. At the quarterback position, based on injuries, I love Aaron Rodgers, but I'm sorry, I can't say that he's an elite prospect right now because he's got question marks out wide. I don't know who he's going to be throwing the ball to from week 1, week 3. I know Jordy Nelson's not coming back this year, so if you would have talked to me 2 weeks ago, if you were drafting 2 weeks ago, it was cool to have Aaron Rodgers. As a matter of fact, and at least I have Aaron Rodgers. I don't like it as much as I did on draft day. At the quarterback position, there is only one guy who I can anoint as elite, and that is Andrew Luck. That's it. Everybody else, from 2 to about 12 to 14, they look the same to me. I close my eyes and I say, Tom Brady looks the same as Aaron Rodgers. It sounds asinine to say that, but I just don't see Aaron Rodgers putting up the numbers that we would have expected maybe a month or two. So I'm sorry that he's not elite. So Andrew Luck and then the rest of them. It is just a pile of guys that could put up big numbers on 1 week, but disappoint you in the next. So be careful at the quarterback position. If you're going to draft a quarterback in the first couple of rounds, if his last name is Luck, I wouldn't touch it. Plain and simple. If you want to go to running backs, there's guys who I think are elite, and then there's everybody else. Le'Veon Bell, if you're not afraid to touch a guy who's got a 2-game suspension, you got to draft him. I myself, if I'm picking top 3, I don't like a back who's already going to be on the shelf for the first 2 weeks. I would leave him alone. But if you get to the 4 or 5 spot and Le'Veon is looking you out in the eye, I don't know how you don't pick him up. Adrian Peterson, everybody believes that Adrian is going to make the league pay. He is going to punish the league for the suspension that he had to endure last year. So I love him. Jamal Charles, Eddie Lacy, Marshawn Lynch. I'm going to tell you there's a guy that some people love that I absolutely am cold on. C.J. Anderson, best of luck to you. I believe that Denver has a stable of backs that could easily be in the lineup. I don't trust C.J. Anderson. I know some people have him as high as the number 1 overall. Some people have him as a top 6, 7 running back. I'm just going to tell you how I see it. I don't see him as elite. But really, include Marshawn Lynch in there. I don't know that there's any other guys who you can call elite. Guys who I really love are like Jeremy Hill. Jeremy Hill has the potential to be an elite back. Another guy who I am salivating over. I think this kid could easily break into the top 7 in fantasy at the running back position. Latavius Murray. Who is his backup? Roy Halou? Are you kidding me? I see Latavius Murray as a potential 3-down running back who could absolutely destroy the NFL this year. Could easily run for 1,400 yards and put up about 10 touchdowns. I think he has that kind of potential. Now, I am not going to anoint him as elite. If you're talking elite, he's not there yet. But I'm telling you about some guys who I feel like have the potential to take it to that level this year.
You don't like Matt Forte or Shady in Buffalo?
We're hearing that Shady might not even be ready, and I've heard that hamstring injury is one that can linger. That specific portion of where the hamstring is, and the fact that Sean just a couple of weeks ago was so confident in his ability to get back for week 1. Now we're hearing I don't know about that from guys like the Arian Foxes of the world. We know that those soft tissue injuries can take a little bit of time to heal. And I just don't know that you want to put yourself through that. Last year I put myself through the ringer with Andre Ellington, and it is not cool to have a running back who you're relying on to give you number 1 RB production, and every single week you're dealing with a guy who's questionable or a game time decision. You can't live with that kind of stress. Matt Forte, man, the Bears are bad. I'm just going to tell you, I've seen enough of the Bears in the preseason that I just don't know where they're going to get any offense.
He's definitely not catching 100 balls again this year. I can assure.
Yeah, they already told us that. They said we're absolutely not going to let him catch 100 balls, and that's fine. Any fantasy owner cannot expect him to replicate the numbers that he put up last year. But at the same time, I think he could be facing a lot of 8-man boxing. I just don't like what they have outside. I do not like what I've seen from their offense. They didn't look clean in week 2 of the preseason, so I'll give them credit. Jay has been a better decision maker this year, but they have not moved the ball. And if you look at what they put together in week 3 of the preseason, it was outright just disgusting. I'm not a Matt Forte. Last year I loved him. This year, I'm sorry, Matty. You're my favorite back in the league, but I do not like you in fantasy this year, and you're definitely not elite.
Okay. Receiver.
Receiver. How could you not like Antonio Brown? How could you not? Who doesn't like Antonio Brown? The Karate Kid, if you will. Love Antonio Brown. a lot of publications that are going to tell you he's the number one receiver, and I will not argue with any of them. I love Antonio Brown. Another guy who I am absolutely enamored with is Julio Jones. You saw week 1 of the preseason. I mean, Matt Ryan goes out, first drive of the preseason, 6 for 6, 4 of the 6 passes go to a guy named Julio. And if you've not been paying attention, Roddy White has fell off the roster. The guy is not coming back. I'm sorry, I'm not a Roddy White fan this year. I know you're not asking for this right now, but stay away from Roddy White. Please stay away from Roddy White. Julio Jones is going to absolutely explode this year. Wouldn't be so surprised to me if healthy. I think Julio Jones is probably going to finish this year as the number 1 receiver in fantasy. Like I said, I'm not an Odell Beckham Jr. guy. I love Dez Bryant once again. I repeat, do not think that Randall Cobb is elite just because there's no Jordy Nelson. I think Randall Cobb had the best season that you were going to get from him last year. I do not think that he sees much of an uptick in his production just because Jordy Nelson is not playing opposite of him. So be careful there. Odell Beckham Jr., I've already touched on. I see sophomore slump for that kid, so be careful. AJ Green, I would love it if I could tell you that I felt like he was going to have a monster year, but he's relying on a guy named Andy. I don't trust him. And then, AJ is a high-maintenance athlete. Missed a lot of games last year. You don't know what you're going to get out of him, so be careful. But, getting back to it, Calvin is elite. Guys, listen to me. Calvin is elite. Calvin will be back. I don't expect nagging injuries. And we know Calvin's going to suit up regardless. And as long as Megatron is on the field, Megatron is a threat. Megatron is the man. Don't be intimidated by the numbers that Golden Tate put up last year. Golden Tate is going to still put up numbers, but that does not have to come at the detriment of Calvin Johnson. Outside of the guys I just named, you're not talking elite. There's a lot of other good receivers, and, that's fine. Brandon Cooks could be elite this year. Drew Brees has got to throw the ball to somebody. Marquise Colston is another guy. Oh, man, I think Father Time is creeping up on him and tapping him on the shoulder. So Brandon Cooks looks like an absolute stud monster. Not elite. He's not elite because we haven't seen it. We got to see a good sample size last year. You like the direction he was going before the injury cost him the miss. I believe it was 6 games. But,
I think I know the answer to this. What I'm about to ask you. But what about D-Hop? What about DeAndre Hopkins out there in Houston?
Have you not been watching Hard Knocks? I'm just not in love with their quarterback.
I knew where you were going to go. I knew you were going to go there.
I typically stay away from teams that,
You don't like Billy Ho? You don't like Billy Ho?
Oh, man, Brian, boy, as a game manager, I know. In fantasy, absolutely not. No. No.
Okay, I get it. Okay, tight end.
Let me give you that. DeAndre Hopkins is a great receiver. We don't want to take anything away from the kid. He's going to have a good season, but he's relying on some questionable quarterback play. Hey, if you look back a couple years ago, Josh Gordon did it. So I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just telling you, I'm not picking him in the first couple of rounds. Third round, I'm still on the fence on the 4th round. Hey, go for it. Tight end position. I'm gonna upset some people here too, but guess what? I don't care. You got Gronk. Gronk is a monster. Gronk is an elite player. Jimmy Graham. I'm gonna address Jimmy Graham. I'm not telling you Jimmy Graham is I don't know who Jimmy Graham is anymore. Okay, last year I soured on him, and then we get traded to Seattle. I don't trust Russell Wilson. Since when has Seattle put a receiver in the top 20 at any position aside from running back? I don't trust the Seattle Seahawks to be able to integrate Jimmy Graham into their offense and allow him to put up the numbers that we were accustomed to seeing from him prior to last year. Stay away from Jimmy Graham. Do not draft him early if you can help it. Number 3 tight end, a guy who you have to say is a lead is Greg Olsen. I know after last year, first Pro Bowl season, I believe, I know after last year you're saying, what more can Greg Olsen do? We'll find out.
Hey, layoff. They just traded for Kevin Norwood, man. Help is on the way.
Healthy is on the way. He makes the difference. That's right. A guy who I was screaming from the rooftops. This is a guy who I was in love with, drafting in the last round of every draft last year. If you let me, a guy who I'm just thinking is going to shatter the fantasy world. He introduced himself last year. Some people might still be sleeping on him. Travis Kelce is going to have a big season. Now, once again, I'm talking about a guy who's relying on a quarterback that, doesn't like to take a lot of chances.
And if you watch this preseason, he's been taking chances. They haven't been good ones, but.
Okay, listen, man. You can do whatever you want in preseason. Will that continue into the regular season? Alex Smith is Alex Smith. But that's not to take anything away from Travis Kelce, because with Travis Kelce, I believe he led all tight ends in yards after contact. Travis Kelce is an absolute monster, okay? So all Alex Smith has to do is get the ball in his hands. The kid is going to explode. He told me that he wasn't even 100% after the microfracture surgery. So what he was doing last year was just awful. This was sample size of what he can offer you over the course of an entire season. Travis Kelce should be averaging at least 4 to 5 catches every single week, and he's going to put up 80-plus yards with a touch. That's what I'm expecting out of Travis Kelce. After you get out of that, man, once again, all of these other tight ends, I know some people are like, Zach Ertz, you didn't even get to see him. The Philadelphia offense spreads the ball around. You don't know where it's going. Don't let that one anomaly. I know we had a game where we had over 12 catches. Yeah. Zach Ertz is not putting up that type of production every single week. The rest of those guys at the tight end position, man, you draft him in the 7th, you draft him in the 12th. It's pretty much going to be the same guy. Sleeper guy I'm in love with, Tyler Eifert. But once again, he's relying on a guy named Andy. I saw Andy get him absolutely obliterated by 2 safeties in the second preseason game. So once again, I love Tyler Eifert. He's got the injury concerns, and he's relying on a man named Andy. Be careful. But I'm just saying, if he's around the 14th, 15th round, or the late round, I don't know how your draft is constructed, but if he's there, don't be afraid to pick Tyler Eifert. I like Tyler Eifert after any of those first 4 guys I named, yes, including Jimmy Graham. So yeah, that's a sleeper for you out there.
That was part 1 of my interview with Brandon Arrington, fantasy football guru. Be sure to check in for part 2 of that interview on the next edition of the In the Lab Room podcast. So be sure to look for that on the next installment of the In the Lab Room podcast. But want to wrap this episode up by breaking down the season preview of the AFC East. This division features the Super Bowl champion New England Patriots as they try to defend their crown. Going to be a very arduous task, especially with the adversity facing them starting out the season. But I don't want to start with the defending Super Bowl champions. I want to start at the bottom of the barrel, the team that finished in last place in this division first. Of course, I'm speaking of the New York Jets. They've had some adversity in, to say the least, they've had some shortcomings of their own this offseason. We all know about the Geno Smith saga and why he won't be available for them to start out the season. They'll be running with journeyman quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick, and that in itself is enough to keep this team from finishing anywhere but the basement of the AFC East. But I will say, I had a chance to watch the Week 3 preseason game versus the New York Giants, and that's the blueprint right there. That game is exactly what the Jets have to do in order to win football games and be a competitive team this year. They have to play defense, which they did. Nice pick 6 by Cromartie. I thought they did a good job of stifling the Giants' run game, making Eli Manning uncomfortable. Those are all things they're going to have to do on a consistent basis. I don't see them, however, being able to sustain that type of play with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the quarterback position for the entire season. And again, he's not supposed to be their starter for the entire season. At some point, Geno Smith will be back, but when he does come back, when he is ready to play, what do you expect out of Geno Smith? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think you can expect him to just come into the lineup and just start shredding the National Football League. I just don't think that's what you can expect from Geno Smith. So this team is in a transitional period, to say the least. The one thing I will say the Jets have on their side is they have a lot of teams that weren't good a season ago and you could argue won't be very good this year. They have the Redskins, the Browns, the Titans, the Raiders, the Jags. I don't know how good those teams are going to be this year. But if you're just looking at those teams and what they have been able to accomplish over the last few years, you would think that those teams aren't going to be very good. Their track record suggests that they're going to struggle. And if the Jets want to have any semblance of a successful season, they need to beat those type of teams on their schedule. At the end of the day, I look at this Jets team, I see a 6-10 ball club, which is going to bring up the rear in this very competitive AFC East division. You move on to the team that finished third in this division last year, and that's the Miami Dolphins. I have a lot of high aspirations for this team this year. Ryan Tannehill looks the part as he seems to be taking the steps necessary to becoming an upper echelon quarterback in this league. Now, again, it's preseason, small sample size, don't want to blow it out of proportion, but Ryan Tannehill has a lot of weapons around him right now, and he's utilizing them, and he's having confidence, something that I don't know if he's always had on his side. He's having confidence start to shine through, and they're starting to look really good on the offensive side of football. This defense looks poised for a breakout campaign, and Ndamukong Suh looks to be a world beater, and his presence alone is going to elevate the play of those around him. Earl Mitchell looks like the guy that I thought he was going to be when the Dolphins got him a year ago in free agency. I thought Earl Mitchell was an outstanding pickup then. I think he's an even better pickup now because of who's next to him. A guy like Cameron Wake is going to benefit. A guy like Olivier Vernon is going to... This defense is going to be incredible, especially up front with that front four. I'm anxious to see what this defense is going to be able to do. And this is a team right now that I think could really make a push to steal this division away from the New England Patriots. But the key for the Dolphins in this season, do your work early. That's my mantra for the Dolphins in the 2015 campaign. Do your work early. 6 of the first 9 games for this Miami Dolphins team on the road. So you're telling me that of your 8 road games, 6 of them come in the first 9 weeks of the season. If you can find a way to get a portion, and I'm talking about 4 out of the 6 road games early in the season, if you can find a way to win those games and set yourself up for a nice homestand towards the end of the season, you've got a shot if you're the Miami Dolphins. And in those first 6 road games, Redskins, Titans, and the Jacksonville Jaguars are included. You have to win those road games if you are the Miami Dolphins. That's going to be the key to their season. I look at this Dolphins team, I see 10-6 all day long. Will that be enough to win the division? We'll see. You move on to the team that finished second, right behind the Patriots in this division last year, and it's the Buffalo Bills. Nobody, and I mean nobody, misses the playoffs like the Buffalo Bills. Maybe that'll change this season. We shall see. But I look at this team, I am so fascinated with Tyrod Taylor. It's not even funny. His performance this preseason has me buzzing, and I think has the rest of the league buzzing, and everyone is anxious to see how he plays, because this defense is playoff bound. They're playoff ready. Okay, this defense is ready to rock and roll. The offense, however, has been the one hindrance to this Bills team's success. You stick a quarterback in there with the talents of a Tyrod Taylor, and what's so funny about this whole situation is that Tyrod Taylor didn't exhibit the type of poise in the pocket, the passing ability, the ability to make plays from the pocket. He didn't display this in Baltimore. we already knew about his legs and how he could manipulate defenses with his legs. We haven't seen Tyrod Taylor work and operate from the pocket as a pocket passer since he's gotten into the National Football League. And that's what's so fascinating about this whole situation and him starting in Buffalo, is that this guy has actually shown throughout the preseason, and again, small sample size, don't blow it out of proportion, but he's shown the ability to not only beat you with his legs, but more importantly, beat you with his arm, being able to make throws from the pocket, and accurate ones at that. This offense looks good, running with Tyrod Taylor under center. I like E.J. Manuel's performance this preseason, and if you're asking me which one you take, E.J. Manuel or Matt Castle, if you're only taking two quarterbacks, I say tell Matt Castle to hit the road jack, keep E.J. Manuel, and keep it moving. You can run a lot of the same things in your playbook that you're running with Tyrod. With E.J., he's a mobile quarterback. I like what they're doing. I like the way that they're maturing in Buffalo. I look at their schedule, and this is the key portion of the schedule that's going to make or break their season. From weeks 9 to week 14, the Bills have 5 out of 6 games on the road. Ouch! Okay? And really, you have 1 week in between those games that you're off. You have a bye week between weeks 9 and 10. That doesn't count, though. You're on the road week 9. You're on the road for week 11. You're on the road week 12. This team is going to make the postseason or miss it because of this stretch of football. Week 9, at the Jets. Week 11, at New England. Week 12, at Kansas City. Week 13, home for Houston. Week 14, at Philadelphia. Week 15, at Washington. That's your season. If you are the Buffalo Bills, that is your season right there. You find a way to come out of that 6-game stretch at either 3-3 or 4-2, and this team is probably going to make the postseason. I'm banking on them struggling in that stretch of football. That's some tough football right there. At the Jets, at New England, at Kansas City, home for Houston, at Philly, at Washington. I see this Bills team 9-7 on the season. And once again, missing the postseason. So we get to the defending Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. They get out of the blocks stumbling this season because of the Tom Brady suspension. Now, we don't know if that's going to be upheld, if it's going to be overturned, if it's going to be reduced. We don't know any of those things right now. All of that is circumstantial. The ruling is supposed to come down here very shortly. All signs point to Tom Brady's suspension being upheld. At the end of the day, if he misses 4 games of the season, and just about everyone knows the Patriots' first 4 games of the season just because of how much press this suspension has gotten. You're home for Pittsburgh to start the season, at Buffalo, home for Jacksonville, at Dallas first 4 weeks of the season. I see 1-3 with Jimmy G at quarterback. So, if Tom Brady is suspended for the first 4 weeks of the season, 1-3, right out of the gate, right out of the blocks, he comes back, and the NFL, look, Roger Goodell is not stupid. The NFL set this up. There's a reason why they set these schedules up the way they do, because the NFL is a huge marketing machine. Week 5, at Indy, right off the suspension. The NFL is selling that game as Tom Brady's return on Sunday Night Football versus Andrew Luck, the team they put out of the postseason last year. Crowd's going to be raucous. They're selling that. So they want to uphold that suspension. They want that game to be on prime time. They want that to be the most watched game of the season. Yeah, they set this up. I don't see Brady getting the suspension overturned. I see the Patriots jumping out of the gate 1-3. And I don't see Brady coming back in week 5 as if he never missed any time and just jumping in and picking up where he left off last year when he won the Super Bowl. I don't see that happening. I see them losing that game to the Colts. That's 1-4 to start the season. Now, they will rebound. They will go on a hot streak. They will eventually get to 500 and even surpass that. But at the end of the day, damage will be done. His Patriots team is 10-6. Now, is that good enough to win the division? I don't know, because I think they're going to have the same divisional record as the Dolphins. And I don't know what the percentages will be and what all the tiebreakers will end up being. But 10-6 may not be good enough for the Patriots to win this division this season. We shall see. But that's my take on the AFC East. And that is my first episode of the In the Lab Room podcast. I thank you for joining me. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the Lab Room. Come back and check me out next time. Till then, this is Louie T, signing off.